that happens in this country and in this world. In Jesus' name I pray. I'm going to ask Ms. John, Mr. Scott, to read a word of scripture, and then after that I'll hand over to our moderator, Mr. Michael McAnuff.
Today, I'm going to read from the good news about Jesus as called to Luke chapter 3 from verse 7 to verse 18. One heap of people they come for John baptize them. He said to them, say, "Unu sinate pitney unu. Who want to know to run away from the judgment where come? Do the sitting them where show say unu really tap sin. I know, but I start think to himself, say unu safe, and say, Abraham our father. Let me tell you something. God can make picnic for Abraham out of them rock stone here if he want. Right now, the axe, they are the tree roots, and every one of the tree them will now bear good fruit. I got chopped down and burn up in a fire. The crowd asked John, so what will we do then? He said to them, say, if you have 2 shots, you will give somebody 1. And if you have food, you will do the same thing. John tell them, no collect no more. No, tax collector come to get baptized too. Teacher, they ask John, what will we do? John tell them, no collect no more than what you will collect. Then some soldier asked John, so what about we? What will we do? John answered, no bad up people and take away their money and tell lie upon them to get it neither. Uno feel satisfied with the pay when you get. Them time there, people did really look for the one where God has sent to save them. And I wonder in their mind if John had the Christ. So he said to them, me baptize you in a water, but somebody way more important than me a come. And me not even good enough to pull the trap on his slippers. Him we baptize you in the Holy Spirit and fire. He have a fork in his hand, ready to rake up the floor which part the grain trash out. He might go gather up the grain and put it in a buttery. But he might go burn the trash in a one fire with can't out. And John used holy other word to give good news to the people them. And God word this. Thank God.
Michael, over to you.
Thank you, my brother Lee. Good afternoon, colleagues who are gathered here, and those who are listening on our YouTube channel, and others who will watch and participate in this forum at some other point. I'm Michael McAnuff Jones. I am an HR and OD consultant, chairman of Back to the Bible Jamaica Limited, and I'm involved in pastoral ministry. I'm happy to be here this afternoon to help to guide the proceedings. It promises to be an exciting time. So I want to welcome you all formally to today's forum on the church and socio-economic development in Jamaica. We are gathered here to explore the critical role the church can play in addressing socio-economic challenges in our nation. So as we begin, I want to encourage us to acknowledge the very rich history and contributions of the church in Jamaica. And it certainly extends from education to healthcare, social justice, community development, job creation. The church has indeed become a cornerstone of our society for many years now. Today we're going to delve into the ways the church can continue to make a meaningful impact in Jamaica. We have an esteemed panel of presenters who will share their insights and expertise. I want to apologize for the unavoidable absence of our brother and friend, Professor Trevor Monroe, who, due to matters beyond his control, is not able to join us this afternoon. But it does mean that our two brothers will just have to share for Trevor and say more than we're planning to pay them for. We want to leave here today much clearer than we came, and so the richness of what we will hear has made it necessary for us to get presenters who we don't need to pay. Some questions that I'm going to raise in advance on your behalf include: how can the church reclaim its historical role as a catalyst for socio-economic development in Jamaica? I'm also wanting to invite the panelists to consider the question on what is the church's necessity in addressing the lingering issues of crime, violence, and lack of educational and economic opportunities in marginal social spaces. Thirdly, I want to invite them to consider what are the lessons that we can learn from the church's past achievements in driving social change, such as the fight for emancipation and adult suffrage. Fifthly, how can the church effectively collaborate with government and other stakeholders to address long-term developmental mandates? Also want to hear and have answered, among other things, how can the church's agency in socio-economic development be reinvigorated, and what steps can be taken to address its current perceived irrelevance? I also want to hear what are the implications of the charge that was delivered at the Keswick Kingston 24 conference by the speaker from Back to the Bible Canada for the Jamaican church to avoid political concerns, and how should this counsel be interpreted in the context of the church's core mission? Before we start, then, I'd like to outline the format for today's discussion. Each presenter is going to share their remarks in the time that was allotted to them, followed by a Q&A session. And then we're going to open the floor for general discussion and questions from the audience. So let me then introduce our presenters in order of poverty level. And that's a very safe categorization to start with. And we'll start with Reverend Dr. Henley Morgan. And you can determine which direction I'm heading in. Reverend Dr. Henley Morgan, one of my role models, a colleague in ministry, fellow HR practitioner, and one of my key sources for inspiration in men's ministry. Henley is a visionary Jamaican minister and social activist who has dedicated his life to serving marginalized communities. He's the founder of the Agency for Inner City Renewal, a pioneering organization focused on community development, social justice, and empowerment of inner city residents. Through AIR, which is short for Agency for Inner City Renewal, Henley has worked tirelessly to address issues such as poverty, crime, and inequality, promoting holistic transformation and sustainable change in Jamaica's inner cities. His innovative approaches have improved lives, restored hope, and fostered community resilience. A respected leader and advocate, Henley has collaborated with government agencies, NGOs, and community groups to drive positive change. Henley's commitment to social justice, education, and economic empowerment has earned him recognition and respect nationwide. Our second presenter is Mr. Courtney Campbell, a longtime friend and colleague, ministry partner, and schoolmate from that powerful school named after the Scottish church reformer, Knox College. Shall I say the real KC? And I know there are people in this room who may disagree, but that can become a justice issue if they so choose. Courtney is a seasoned Jamaican business leader and financial expert, currently serving as the CEO of VM Group, one of Jamaica's leading financial institutions. With a proven track record of driving growth, innovation, and excellence, Courtney has been instrumental in shaping the VM Group's strategic direction and success. Under his leadership, VM Group has expanded its offerings, enhanced customer experience, and fostered a culture of innovation and inclusivity. Courtney's vision for the VM Group is centered around empowering Jamaicans to achieve financial freedom and prosperity. A respected industry thought leader, Courtney has contributed to various initiatives promoting financial literacy, entrepreneurship, and community development. He also serves on several boards and committees, including the United Church in Jamaica and Grand Cayman, the Council for World Missions, and Mentoring a Nation, demonstrating his commitment to church social responsibility and nation building. Courtney has achieved many accolades and recognitions, solidifying his position as a prominent figure in Jamaica's financial landscape. So I'm going to begin with our first presenter. I'm going to start with my left, with the person sitting on my left, which doesn't define my political position at all. Neither does starting with the person on my right define my political position. I'm just starting where it is more convenient to do so. So, would you all welcome Courtney Campbell as he makes his first presentation.
Thank you very much, Michael, and as you said, welcome to all those who are viewing online, and I want to thank the Caribbean Christian Leadership Network for inviting me and all of us to share in this very important discussion, and to commend them for the work that they have been doing over the years. I wish to answer your questions and start my presentation with a reminder of our national pledge, which says, "Before God and all mankind, I pledge the love and loyalty of my heart, the wisdom and courage of my mind, the strength and vigor of my body in the service of my fellow citizens." With some feedback. I promise to stand up for justice, brotherhood, and peace, to work diligently and creatively, to think generously and honestly, so that Jamaica may, under God, increase in beauty, fellowship, and prosperity, and play her part in advancing the welfare of the whole human race. I would invite us on this Emancipation Day to recognize the power of our national pledge, because pledging heart and mind and body in the service of our fellow citizens is a commitment that is very much aligned with the foundational Christian ethic of love, and the love that is reflected in service to community. So commitment to justice and brotherhood and peace are things that Christians, based on our belief system, should naturally lead in. And so working under God's guidance so that Jamaica may increase in beauty, fellowship, and prosperity must find passionate commitment from Christians who believe that from Him, through Him, and to Him are all things. That all people are created in God's image, and that God calls us to love and to build fellowship, and that we should be relentless in pursuing a nation in which all lives flourish. And you know, Jesus said it, "I come that they might have life and have it more abundantly." So then I close in terms of the scripture references with John 13. I love this, verse 35, that says, Jesus says, "By this shall all know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." So it appears to me that many leaders of the church in the pre- and post-emancipation period understood this leadership responsibility, because they sacrificed, they stepped forward, not with self-interest in mind, but they stepped forward to sacrifice for others out of love. And if we consider the work that was done by the church in education prior to independence in 1962, I'm indebted to some work done by Professor Errol Miller. He shared at a 60th anniversary lecture for Bethel Baptist Church many years ago, and he did some research and shared that of the 44 high schools that were part of the public system of high school education at independence in 1962, 11 were founded by the Anglican Church, 9 by trusts, 8 by Roman Catholics, 4 by the United Church, 3 by the Methodists, 3 by government. Of the 44, only 3 by government, 2 by Baptists, One each was by the Society of Friends, the Church of God, the Associated Gospel Assemblies, and one jointly by the Presbyterian and Methodist. That is, 32 of 44 schools were either directly founded and owned by the church. It is important to note that the schools established and connected with the churches are typically those that are the top performers 62 years later. No accurate account of the education system that currently exists in Jamaica excludes the impact of the church in its creation and operation until independence. Government, as a major provider and operator of the education system, is a phenomenon since independence in 1962. From emancipation to independence, the church was the prime mover in creating education capacity. So thanks to Professor Errol Miller for that. And then I moved to another professor, this time from KC, Professor Orlando Patterson. In his book, The Confounding Islands, he points out that the Barbadian pre-independence government was spending 2.3 times more per student than it was the Jamaican government in 1960. As a result, the average Barbadian in 1960 had 1.5 more years of schooling than the average Jamaican. So it's 5.5 years in Barbados to 4 years for the Jamaicans, for those aged 15 and over, according to Professor Patterson's research. In fact, I noticed a graph from Professor Patterson that in the decade after independence, that gap actually widened to 3.5 years, so in Barbados it was 8.5 years of education, and in Jamaica 5 years. So was it because the churches had scaled back on new investments after independence? You know, you would have to tell me. So I could speak about my sector, in which the churches came together in the 1860s and 1870s to start the building societies. I could speak about the work done in self-government, but I'm going to continue to speak about education, just in the interest of time. So that's the history. Where have we gone now since 1962? Starting with the church, I think many good things have been done. Social outreach continues. I think every church, certainly the more established ones, have significant social outreach arms. But alongside that, the church has become, I think it's fair to say, more splintered. We certainly have more denominations now. More churches are privately owned, more wealthy clergy in some sections of the church with more ostentatious titles. The church is more politically divided now than in 1962. I wasn't born then, but I'm venturing to say. And I would say that the involvement in leadership and inspiring for national good, when I think of the work that was done pre-1962 versus now, is, I would say, lower. So we're, I think, less effective, and I say we are less effective in providing that moral clarity and direction in matters of justice and equity. And as my current General Secretary of the United Church says, Reverend Norbert Stevens, the church now reflects the society rather than inspiring and leading the society. So that's the church. What about Jamaica, context in which we exist? Jamaica is certainly less productive. Before COVID-19, Jamaica's economy suffered from lower rates of productivity. According to the official figures from the Jamaica Productivity Center, Jamaica has the lowest labor productivity when compared to other Caribbean countries such as Barbados, Domrep, St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago. Over the past 2 decades, Jamaica has had weak and declining levels of productivity. From 2001 to 2019, labor productivity, capital productivity, and total factor productivity recorded annual average declines of 0.6%, 0.2%, and 0.4% respectively. And one reason for the low productivity is the low availability of some of the skills required to be globally competitive in this era. So we have to transform the content of our training. And I read a recent study that looked at GDP per capita growth from 1961 to 2017 for 84 developing countries. And the study clearly shows that the Asian tigers, the Thailand and Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and the dragons, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, that all of those are rapidly converging toward the standard of advanced nation. It's becoming more and more difficult to distinguish their standard of living from those of the developed nation, of the more advanced nations. While the least advanced African countries, such as Central African Republic and Congo and Niger, Gambia and Caribbean nations, and it was, in a sense, personally challenging to look at the graph and when I saw that Caribbean nations such as Haiti and our beloved Jamaica and some Latin American countries such as Venezuela have stagnated or experienced sluggish growth. Why? What has caused the difference in growth rates? Many factors are responsible, but one key lever of frontier innovation is that of education. The same education that the church invested in so much especially between emancipation to independence. And then finally, final reference is that last year, in the inaugural UWI Mona VM Group Distinguished Lecture, University of London Professor Antonio Andreoni, he's a development economist and sustainable development expert. He gave a fascinating presentation on the battle that most middle-income nations face in their quest for advancement. And the lecture is on YouTube. I invite you to take some time to watch it. But he and his colleagues, Professor Andreoni and his colleagues, found that very few countries have actually managed to successfully move up the income ladder. According to the World Bank, of the 101 countries classified as middle income in 1960, 2 years before our independence, only 14 became high income by 2008. Right? That's 58 years later. And the 14 included Ireland, some southern EU countries, and the East Asian miracles, some of them that I just mentioned, such as South Korea. And so the question we must ask ourselves is, how do we gain a greater share of what is called global manufacturing value added and exponentially increase our GDP per capita to break out of the middle income trap and into a higher income group? How can we be bolder? And how can the church facilitate it? And then really what Professor Andreoni said is that this means that we have to invest more in reskilling our people to meet the needs of today and tomorrow. Emerging digital technologies call for a new set of digital capabilities and skill profiles. For example, programming skills, web and application development skills, digital design, data management, visualization, analytics, which build on advanced literacy, numeracy, and IT skills. And so we need to ask in church whether we are doing enough, whether we are demonstrating the leadership to equip our people with these skills and with the expertise to facilitate this transformation. It is true that our unemployment rate has fallen, and that's good. But if you look in the details, the largest increase in the employed labor force is an occupation group called service workers and shop and market sales workers, followed by what they refer to as elementary occupations. There's no life flourishing by growing in those particular areas. So in the context of our global reality, and as buttressed by Professor Andreoni and his colleagues' findings, we have to be bold enough to do what is needed to ensure that Jamaicans develop critical digital skills that allow them to succeed in a digital world. And that's the only way that our businesses, our nation, and our people will truly thrive. So let me wrap up by going directly then to what, and I could go through some of the statistics that Professor Patterson shared. He shared the recent reform of education in Jamaica. And the only thing I would say from that is their conclusion, which I'm going to read for you, that the World Bank's most recent human capital reports indicate that Jamaica has a learning crisis of relatively high enrollment and poor education performance that is getting worse, contributing to its deteriorating human development index. And I go through lots of stats, which I'm not going to get to share with us. So the question I'll conclude with, Mr. Chair, Mr. Moderator, and Dr. Morgan, is what then can the church do for education? I think we need to, I'm proposing that we need to organize ourselves at the local committee level and work across denominational boundaries to launch a new deal for education. A new deal for education. The church has to resume a leadership role. Church leadership in education is an underutilized strength. Church partnership in education is a well-kept secret. The United Church and the Methodist Church have done wonders at St. Andrew High, or the ladies would say St. Andrew High, and St. Andrew Prep School, right? They use the experience from leading in the more successful Jamaican schools to inspire and mobilize our church membership and the communities to partner with government in the majority of schools that are not currently within our jurisdiction. Churches and Christians must commit resources, that means money, to better equip some of our schools that are being left behind, to provide scholarships and bursaries for tertiary education. Many of these schools suffer from poor governance and accountability. The school boards don't perform. There is no minimum qualification to be nominated to a school board. And there is an imbalance in the availability of qualified and competent representatives. Church should nominate new competent people, passionate people, to serve on school boards and help the administrators to develop inspiring new visions. The church must lead in improving the quality of care and training in our early childhood institutions. We must lead in establishing and operating facilities to better address the needs of children with special needs. Parents with children with special needs have to migrate if they really want the best for these children. We need to respond to that. We must take responsibility to raise the standard of outcomes and character education in our schools. We must reskill our people by investing in quality technical and vocational education. To achieve quality education for all, we must be leaders, and we must do that irrespective of geography or community. So I go back to Reverend Stevens, who said that the church now needs a global, outward-looking approach. And I say to us, let us inspire our members to pursue this new vision of life more abundant for everyone.
Thank you, Courtney. Wow. If we were in a different forum at this point, I would issue an altar call. And we may yet do it, actually. But tremendous. You know, just simply tremendous. The need for a new deal in education. A strengthening of leadership, an improvement of governance systems, a deepening of a commitment to accountability, best practice diffusion, because we are owners of the strategic asset that is called information, because we own so many schools, a refreshing of effort across the value chain of education delivery, and a refocus on the tiers and the diversified approaches that are required across the tiers, and all grounded within the context of the need for us to bring love to bear on what we do in this nation, and to positively incite a different kind of action. I don't think that we could leave here today after having heard the first presentation and not be clear in our minds on some of the cultural context issues that we need to confront, some of the legacy issues that arise between Jamaica and other countries in the region, I think we're much clearer, Courtney, having heard you, and I think our interest must have been piqued on the deficit in total factor productivity and the solutions that are clearly required to confront those. No wonder the scripture says in Proverbs 22, it says, "You see a man skilled in his work. He will not serve in front of obscure people. He will serve in front of kings." Isn't that what we want our people to become and to aspire to? We can do it. At this point, then, I'm going to turn it over to Henley to take us into the stratosphere.
First, giving honor to God. These days I have been speaking a lot about honor, going back to the Hebrew and the Greek, and concluding that Jamaica is lacking in honor. And so I start by giving precedence to God Almighty, because next I'm going to be honoring a human. And I want to be sure that what I have to say does not exceed what I say about God. Amen. Yakengeli, God has ordained you. Didn't always appreciate it. He sent you into my life at a particular time. And he has ordained you to do a work. And all I can say is keep doing that work. Don't be discouraged. Keep doing that work. Today is a manifestation of that work. And I'm so happy to you, and by extension the Caribbean Christian Leadership Network, for having invited me. I prefer short introductions, and it's very few times that I will take up time allotted to me to speak to enhance the introduction. But in this setting, I must say what is not immediately observable. I am a black nationalist. I am a Pan-Africanist. If you visit my office in Trenchtown, one of the first things you'll observe is that the walls of the boardroom are replete, covered with the great kings and queens of Africa. And the greatest compliment I've ever been paid was by a Jewish rabbi who visited me. And after he observed the setting, he said to me, "But Dr. Morgan, aren't you a Christian?" I said, "Yes. But I do not see the picture of a white Christ." And I said, "Christ lives within me." Not that I try to color Christ, but I try to express Christ through what I do. So it's very important for you to know why I would be so motivated. Why being at this spot today trumped being on the North Coast. Am I hearing an amen, a hallelujah? I don't get enough opportunity to show my true colors, quotation mark. Thank you, Yakengeli. The topic is the church and socio-economic development. And yes, in the way that pseudo-intellectuals analyze things, it may seem to be generic and large and all-encompassing. But in one of his communique with the presenters, Yakengeli actually precipitated a central thesis. A central thesis that wonderfully focuses the mind. And I would just like to read it in part. Please listen carefully. The Jamaican church, having played a pivotal role in shaping Jamaica's institutional landscape, has retreated from its social activism and now is insufficiently motivated, organized, or equipped to manage a development agenda, and is generally disconnected from the ongoing struggle of the Jamaican people for social justice and economic equity and welfare. Now I got to tell you this, as someone who supervises doctoral students, they have to write what is called a null hypothesis. So it has to be stated in a way that does not reveal any prejudice the researcher might have. You understand? But this one does. And it's probably on the basis of good research. And I would like to just save a lot of time by saying I agree 150%. The church in Jamaica is lacking in influence. By the way, this topic is not unique to Jamaica. Out of Rio and several other things, the UN 185 member countries, I suspect you all know that there is now a new development agenda, which gets expressed now as the Sustainable Development Goals and the Fourth Millennium Development Goals. And the world has pretty much come to the conclusion that just taking care of people at the top of the pyramid does not itself, lends itself to sustainable growth and harmony in society. I was just reading some of the mission statements and visions. I'm a strategic planner of some of the major companies. Their vision statement and mission statements sound like social theses. Mother Earth that disenfranchised people and who you need to make consumers. So we don't need to debate that. So there's a lot of books, a few that I kind of immersed myself in or revisited preparing for today. This one. It's called A Theology as Big as the City by Ray Bakke. Ray Bakke. His name should be well known. The Bakke University, by the way, is one of the best for those of you who want to study to doctoral or whatever level in international theology and also in how do you minister to the city. I was very privileged. My wife, and this is her month, so I don't speak without recognizing her. Well, today's the 1st of August, but July. Her birthday was July 3rd. We got married July 6th. She died July 8th and was buried on July 29th. So I just give her that little recall and honor. And she did a doctorate with Bakke University. And before COVID-19, they would actually visit our working trench down as one of the best manifestations globally of that kind of ministry. Barry Wade, the late Barry Wade, you were there at the launch of this book. I was a speaker at Mona Baptist. It's more from a personal level in terms of the kind of price that, well, you know, kind of, you have to pay for this kind of ministry at the margin. You have to be prepared to be at the margin. Sort of like Paul, you know, with his kind of background, forgetting all those things that are behind and pressing towards the mark of the high, you know. I recommend it. Possibly the very best work, not possibly, the best work by a church person on the topic today and in a historical context is undoubtedly Rebellion to Riot. Undoubtedly. The history of the church, going back to emancipation and the immediate post-emancipation period, and I believe the introduction or the preface was in fact written by your father. In the kind of profound way. The foreword was written by Professor Errol Miller. Let me tell you, it could only been a visitation of the Almighty that could have resulted in this. I recommend it for your reading. And then my own book, My Trenchtown Journey, Lessons in Social Entrepreneurship and Community Transformation for Development Leaders, Policymakers, Academics, and Practitioners. And importantly, it's not a biography, but importantly, the last chapter speaks about a new model of ministry. It's called Christian Social Entrepreneurship, using the triple bottom line approach that powerfully creates wealth. It's available on Amazon, will soon be launched locally. I'm depending on the other panelists. When it's Professor, I almost know exactly what he's going to say. Because we share so much. We're cut off the same cloth. And I would have relied on him to deal a lot with the more historical and the less ecclesiastical aspect of the topic. And I am glad that you dealt with that in your presentation. But my presentation is going to spend a little time on the practical aspect. Martin Luther King Jr. said, I've been to the mountaintop. I said, but I've been in the belly of the beast. I've seen the coming of the glory of the King. And I have seen the coming of the glory of the King. Maybe it's from a different perspective. But with experience as rich as myself, and because we do a lot of mine, and we do a lot of measurement in terms of wealth creation, jobs created, how it's changing behavior, I think when I get the opportunity, that's what I can add best. So mine will be a little bit experiential. I won't give a case study. We don't have enough time of Agency for Inner City Renewal. But in closing, I will say a little bit and then be guided by your question. As with all things, I like to ask myself this question with a church. Should we even be discussing this? Is this even a role that the church should play? So I go to Scripture, and there it is. In Psalm 82, 3-4, a mandate: defend the poor and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and needy, rid them out of the hand of the wicked. And you ask me why I'm in Trenchtown? That's a call to action, man. It's almost violent. It's like doing violence to poverty. Then, what Jesus has to say about it? I know the Bible is the breathed word of God, every single word. He spoke through men who just wrote. But I pay special attention to the portions that are in red in the gospel. Jesus had talked. How did he describe his ministry? The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised. Luke 4:18. I remember one time after we visited a particular church, our church, and after we reached home, my wife was consoling me. She said, Henley, I know how you feel. Because on the way back in the bus, they were talking. Look how the pastor cheer, the bishop cheer, high, and everything look pretty. Eh? And she said, we know you're human, and you must have said, you know, you're not cheering at your church with no man. And she said to me, promise me one thing. You will not build no big fancy church in Jamaica till God use you to build a community. It's been a very hard promise to keep. Then the incarnate God. John 1:14, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Look. G-O-D, the Great Commission, spelled God, G-O-D. Go, Geo. Go is 2/3 of God. I may not have gone to any of the two KC, but I learned enough math. The real work of the church is outside the walls of the church. Do I have an amen? So I feel comfortable that this came directly from God. Incarnational theology then. Let me just say a little bit about it. Jesus came in the flesh to be with the people, to be touched with their socio-economic realities, and to bring salvation to them. Incarnational ministry, therefore, concerns itself with both the spiritual and socio-economic realities. Here is the conundrum. The juxtaposition of spiritual and socio-economic needs leads inevitably to a conflict, because some are of the opinion that social and economic outreach are pursued at the expense of the mission of the church. Could it be that the church in Jamaica, in response to that pressure, has over-adjusted? So that on the socio-economic continuum, it has moved more towards less? I ask and leave it for your consideration. When we talk about influence, what are we talking about? Let me give you some statistics. The 2011 census by Statin, and we're waiting for the release of the current one. At that time, the population of Jamaica was 2.7 million. Listen to me, listen to me. Good. 2.7 million. Of that 2.7, 2.1 million persons had affiliation spread over 21 denominations. That's 78–80%. And by the way, if you had used a lower test like people who go to church sometime, it raises to 85–88%. No other country in the world, not even America, that call itself, oh, it don't call itself no Christian country no more. Not even that. That means the church has influence, and it would have to become a theocracy. But just being in the right place, in the right, you know, and having an interest in the condition of the people who populate the pews church has a lot of, by the way, it was, you remember, was it all in? You see how much money the church could mobilize? Church people. Till even the bank, even Michael Lee should start on. A whole heap of influence. I did a little survey in preparation for this book. And I will never share these results. Well, I might, because I'm going to use it for my watchman. But there are certain things that I just do as family talk. Because the world would use it on Cosway, right? But I wanted to find out what's the perception of church people towards the impact of the church. Church people, you know, not general, right? Church people. And I conducted this among several churches. Let me tell you what it is. What impact do you think the church has great socio-economic impact on society? 5% said yes, 70% say no, 25% say they don't know. Church people. Next question. Active involvement of the church through its social outreach in the community. How you rate your church? Another church. 10%. They don't see it. 65% say no, they don't see no active involvement of the church through social lecture. Only 10% say they see it. 25% said they don't even know. Impact of the church on moral standard of the community. 0% say they don't see it. It's not happening. Right? In saying they see that, nobody's responding, but 53% say they don't see it happen. Sorry. 47% say they don't even know. Soon done. Is the church influential in political and or business policies and practices of the country? 0 say yes. 95% so no. 5% say they don't know. I'll end with that one in terms of the survey. There are other questions. And I must tell you, without any sense of self-aggrandizement, because I now chair a subcommittee of the PSOJ, because, don't tell nobody this, I do go to a lot of cocktail parties with very rich men. Even marlin fishing. I mean, I eat fish like that, them fish there. But when you go up on that place there, I guess you realize who runs Jamaica. I feel lonely as a church man. When I go some fest, I have my box seat. And think, well, when I look for me, they can't read me out of church. Me are the biggest tiger. Me no see no church people. So if you're not have a place at the table, I represent Botswana. So with the honorary consuls and brigade, almost absent. The church is not like in America, where the church even controls a former president who is not a Christian. And he even moved the U.S. embassy from wherever to Jerusalem. That's an influence. You don't have it. Now, looking at this, and I will just end with a little information about AIR. AIR, Agency for Inner City Renewal, as you heard, is when I fortuitously made a move to Trenchtown, a community from which I'm not, and I have no relatives. We were facing a lot of criticism. People were talking behind my back that me broke, and all kind of thing. And just to give my family some respectability, people would see me and they say, "What are you doing?" I say, "I'm a social entrepreneur." Never even know what it meant. Do I know now? And so it started in 2015, sort of as a social outreach of the church. Praise City International Transformation Center. Listen to the mission statement. And here Yekengele in it, in his thesis. Our mission is to transform zones of social and economic exclusion to zones of opportunities, investments, and wealth. Our mission is to transform zones of social and economic exclusion to zones of opportunities, investments, and wealth. There's a big difference between the church that existed at Emancipation, 1st of August 1938, and the church, the environment that exists now. Back then, government gladly abdicated its responsibility to the free slaves. Right? Gladly abdicated it. So the nonconformist Christians, led mostly by the Baptists, yeah, I'm a Baptist, the Moravian Methodists at that time, established Free Village. Let me say it a little bit, since Trevor wasn't here, he would have said it. Imagine a free village. At the center of it is a church. They mostly raise money overseas, by usually 600 to 1,000 acres. Put in basic infrastructure. Give a no-interest loan to the free slaves to build a little bit better hut than they had on the plantation. It had a school. And then out of that later came credit union, building societies. One of the reasons the church is kind of lacking in this kind of conversation is that politicians only make political decisions. So I can go up at Jamaica House and get to talk to the Prime Minister from morning till night. At the end of the day, him only look on one thing: GDP. God, that's win election. Gross domestic product. By the best calculations, the social sector contributes in Jamaica between 3.5 to 4.5% of GDP. I don't have the figures, but I estimate the church would be half of that. Right? Ideally, the church alone should be at 6%. Right? Back in emancipation time then, I don't have figures because they didn't measure economy those way that time. I suspect the church was like 18% of GDP. Right? Because when the sugar economy crashed, it fell to the church. So, here, juxtapose yourself. Also today, the legal framework is so different that the church cannot be a business. As a matter of fact, the church is not an organization, it's an organism. Right? So, church can't be a business. A business is Grace Kennedy. The head of Grace Kennedy is you know who. And he works under the laws of Jamaica. Church head is Jesus, and we work under the laws of the kingdom. So the church are trying to be a business. So what we do now with air, we use what is called the triple bottom line, borrowed from the environment movement. So we have the church, which is the center, and we know that your thing is salvation benefits. We have a non-government organization. We know that your thing is social benefits. And then we have a business. Your thing is economic benefits. And if you can see three concentric rings like the Olympic, but they converge. The bigger the zone of conversion is, the more transformation you get in your community. And we have come up with a name of it. I don't know if it's the only time in the world, but we haven't come across it. We call it Christian Social Entrepreneurship. Incarnational ministry, the way Jesus ministered. I'm done. The way Jesus ministered. He was not temple priest. There are only 2 recordings in the Gospels and where he was in the church at 12 and another time. And both times was to create a rumpus. He was out at the well beside where he took it to them. He understands that God is 2/3 God. One example, and I can talk. When I went to Trenchtown, oh God, it's in the book. I didn't like talk about it. And what a night that was when I went home and told my wife. That was the night when it was tested. For richer and poorer, until death do us part. I remember I was on my knees. She thought I had come home to confess some wrong. She said, what? I said, I'm faced with the worst choice. We are going to go to America. I have a job offer of $140,000 a year tax-free from one of the multilateral agents. But I got to tell you, I'm going to be dead within a year. God, that's not what I'm made for. And then I popped in. And she said, wherever you will go, I will go. And there we were all. The biggest thing, no job. They can't use their address. Matter of fact, we used to lend them our address. Or whatever. So 99% of what I did, I would call handout. But I soon found that I wouldn't have any hand or pocket to put it in. So we switched the equation. I said, we don't do no handout no more. We are do handout. Today, 99% handout, 1% handout. So one example in the interest of time. We have what we call BOSS, Business Outsourcing Services, where I leverage the fact of my connections at PSOJ and so on. And I now supply employees to Jamaica Flour Mill, to Lasco, I can't count them. So we have over almost 1,000 employees. We have 25 gas stations across Jamaica. Last year our revenue, I can talk. We pay our tax. Was 850 million. Will be over $1 billion this year. That's why I had to call you one time. I said, look man, we need to capitalize this. Let me meet with your people. Because this thing here grow bigger than what we can take, right? I can't guarantee you that that will lead to increase in your membership. Because God is not a, let's make a deal. If I give you a job, we give you my heart. No, God don't do that. Right? But if we could expand that, now we are offering a degree, by the way. We offer an MBA degree, as you know. Right? We have graduated our first cohort with UCC in social entrepreneurship. We're going to be coming out with one in Christian social entrepreneurship for church leaders and corporate people who, you know, have that kind of heritage in their business. We now teach it at Excelsior Community College, by the way. So that's where we are, and that's just one example. So whether it's the Trenchtown Reading Center or the Irish Idle Home or our early childhood school, which has over 300 students, and there's none like it in Jamaica, this is what we do. I will close with two passages of scripture that beautifully crystallizes what the church role must be. Isaiah 1:21. How has the faithful city become a whore? Hey, a Bible may I use that, King James. has Jamaica, how has Kingston become a whore? She who was full of justice, righteousness lodged in her, but now murderers. I have a single rule in reading the Bible. If I read anything that distresses me, it means me can't put up my Bible yet. God, the Bible don't distress. So I read on, and when it gets to verse 26, it said, and I will restore your judges as at the first, and your counselors as at the beginning. Afterward you shall be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. The church is a transforming agent that can make that happen. Thank you. Thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you, Henley. This has been rich, to say the very least. We're going to be having a question time, but ahead of that question time, we're going to ask our panelists to engage in a little bit of conversation together. And I'm sure you'll help them as the time goes by. We're going to have questions online, right, Kengele? But, you know, as I listened, you know, there's a story that I tend to use when I want to kind of do a deep dive on whether we're focused on the people that matter. And this is a story about a bus driver in the Metropolitan Bus Service in the United Kingdom who was seen driving past the bus stop at 3 o'clock every day and picking up nobody. And somebody asked him, why do you keep driving past the bus stop every day at 3 o'clock and picking up no passengers? And the bus driver looked very surprised. And he said to the people who inquired, well, if I have to pick up passengers, I'm not going to be able to keep my schedule. And every time I am brought to the place where I have to re-examine whether people in a particular department or service provider are focused on who matter, this story comes back to mind. And I am left to wonder, having heard Dr. Morgan, having heard Henley revisit the thesis, which I'm going to read again as I invite our panelists to converse on it, to what extent has the church become the bus driver? Because if these statistics are to be believable, or to be believed, and I'm going to have to believe them so that Henley doesn't have to repent before he leaves the conversation today. Socio-economic impact of the church, perceptions about it, 5%. Your understanding of the impact of your church, 20%. The impact of the church on moral life, 0% positive. Top box, 0%. Impact on political life of the country, 0%. It seems to me that the church is firmly in the seat of the bus driver. And all of this against the background of 70% of the population self-declaring church affiliation across 78% across 21 denominations. Henley, I think that Christian social entrepreneurship has to be one leg of a three-legged stool. The first leg is the New Deal in education that Courtney invited. The second leg has to be Christian social entrepreneurship. I hope we discover the third leg before we leave here today, because we can't leave here with a two-legged stool. But I am noting that both presentations have firmly set both presenters have firmly set their presentations within the context of God's love and God's concern for the poor as context. Henley, I think that your work in Trenchtown in providing jobs for people is legendary. It certainly will become a case study for many, many years to come. You know, my mother passed away last week, and I'm sitting here today and I'm proudly declaring that I am the product of Christian social entrepreneurship. Because my school, the school that I went to, and Courtney went to, started by a man with rheumatic heart disease, who Webster United Church sent out into the bushes of Clarendon to start a school, established something called Knox Educational Services, which had the lion's share of the market for exercise books during many years of high school, of many of us sitting in here. You know that book with the little hummingbird and the divider? Well, my mother was one of the two people who operated the machine that stitched those books for 28 years. And that was the outworking of entrepreneurship of the United Church, the Presbyterian Church. And we need more of those. They provided employment for many women in the community who produce people like myself. And I want to engage the panelists in a conversation around, within the context of all of what I've just said, of the thesis statement. The Jamaican Church, having played a pivotal role in shaping Jamaica's institutional landscape, has retreated from its social activism and now is insufficiently motivated, organized, or equipped to manage a developmental agenda, and is generally disconnected from the ongoing struggle of the Jamaican people for social justice and economic equity and welfare. I want to just stop there. I want to invite you gentlemen to help us take this conversation a little further before we invite the audience support. How are we going to respond to what the thesis statement suggests? That the church is in the midst of its own deficit, its own personal winter on the issues that relate to motivation, organization, and equipping to manage a developmental agenda. How are we going to respond to the other side of the deficit as it relates to disconnection from the struggle of the Jamaican people for social justice? Henley, you said that the church is an organism. I want to suggest that that's part of the problem. We can't simply be a living organism. We have to become a living organization if we're going to respond to the deficit. So, gentlemen, I'm going to invite you for a little time into a conversation to respond to this thesis. And I'm not going to intervene, you know, lest I be overwhelmed by the force of the argument. I'm going to start with Courtney.
Yes, thank you. So focusing on the thesis, that's all. Probably that's it. Probably Henley's mic. Is your mic on? Henley's mic. Great, excellent, thank you. Yeah, so whether we're organized, motivated, or equipped, I think the organization is generally there. In fact, in many ways, you know, churches have sought to reorganize themselves over the years to remain more relevant. Many have done renewal and transformation programs. They've tried to keep the organizations fresh, to be relevant to the circumstances. The motivation and the equipping are probably the two areas that we have to kind of candidly consider. Motivation really comes about because you are focused on a particular purpose, a particular objective. And one could argue that the purpose, or the purposes, and the particular visions being pursued by the church generally. And remember, the church is not a homogeneous set of people either, right? And the church, by the way, is not just the pastors, it's the body of Christians. That we could be rightfully accused of not having a sufficiently holistic vision of what our mandate is. And so we're focused on evangelism, bringing people into a knowledge of Christ, which is important, and that's you know, the start of the journey. But have we done the work on discipleship? Have we done the work to ensure that people understand what is required of them in this new journey? Have we done the work of engaging the whole body in understanding the impact that we should be having on the community? How many Christians are sensitive to climate change, for example, and our responsibility as stewards of the environment, right? And then equipping is another matter. That have we taken the time out to do the necessary work on ensuring that we can play an active, informed role on the matters that impact people today? So, for example, right now, Jamaica is in the throes of constitutional reform. And thankfully, you know, Pastor David Henry sits on the committee, and I believe the Jamaica Umbrella Group of Churches has a representative there. So that's good. I'm sure they're doing a great work. And I saw Pastor Henry's presentation last year at the CCLN forum last year. So thanks for inviting him, Yakingale. But I have to question whether the broader church has taken the time to study the current constitution, to study, to consider what changes we the people need to have, so that the final product is not something that is merely the consensus of the two main political parties and a few people who have been appointed to that committee. Who in the church or in the churches generally are going to come together to do that research and to that sounding from the people, and to then funnel that into helping us to improve governance in the country? Because that governance informs some of the lack of governance informs some of the lack of progress that we have had. And then if we're able to improve our governance and our institutions, I think it would make us more prosperous as a people. You know, so that's how I would want to respond to organization, motivation, and equipping. I think we have a lot of work to do with the latter two.
In strategic planning, the old word they used to use for it in university studies, they do what is called a SWOT analysis. That before you attack a problem or go in and start to tear down an organization, like a certain person I won't mention by name has now added to his record. But you know, the gospel says, well, if a people can't tear down, you know, well, you must tear down to build up. The building up heart. But in the SWOT, S means strengths, W means weaknesses, O means opportunities and threats. I have to admit that in my presentation, I was more on the weaknesses and threats as far as the church is concerned. Don't overlook the strengths and opportunities. The truth of the matter, gentlemen, ladies, the hardest part of the work is already done. One, we have people, our people, in places of influence. I present you Exhibit A. And we have heard of other people in our church who are even on the Constitutional Reform Committee. That, if you are starting from scratch for that, it would deter your effort. The second thing is this. In your pews, in our pews, how many of you know that Jamaican women are ranked in the top 5 in what? Olympics going on. In what? Huh? Entrepreneurship. Number 3. That means if you have $100 US dollars to give anybody with the hope of getting a return from it, I'm not being racial, don't give to a Russian woman Don't get to America. You notice in America, though, the Jamaican, where the Jamaican is, right? In what's going on. Don't give it to our English. Find the proverbial mismatching. The one who you leave at your yard as your helper, and her picnic look healthier than yours off of your grocery. And on the weekend, she's in Coronation Market, a Higla. And Sunday, she's in church wearing one of the biggest hats, maybe to cover her sin. She's smarter than the minister of finance. She worked miracles. Maybe out of 5 children, one might drop out, another one turn it worthless. But still, one of them is commissioner of police, who now call her a hustler and terrorize her. Am I being suitably dramatic? The men are ranked at number 12. I think we should set some high-hanging fruit. 2 things when you go on now transformation. Number 1, the church must not usurp the role of government. We pay taxes. They are to deliver education. If you come in and start do what government must do, there's a lot of study on this, right? What we do must be value added. We must move the good to the excellent. Let's set low-hanging fruit. Let me tell you this. There's a study that I tell you that shows that Jamaicans are among the best nascent entrepreneurs in the world. Hope you, all of your hand if you have ever seen this study. It's called the Global Entrepreneurial Monitor Report. Have you ever seen it? Huh? So you know what? I would love to get the church. And by the way, in this book, it defines exactly what we're talking about when we talk about the church. Right? Because we use the word kind of, you know, but we won't go into it that now. But you have to define the church. And Yekengele, in his thesis, did correctly say there are churches that are doing a lot. But you end up with sub-optimization because not all, are you with me? You're not getting you're not getting the aggregate, you're not getting the collective impact, so you end up with what's called sub-optimization. So, what percentage of Jamaicans are unbanked? 43%. That means even though we have people with $1 million ideas in their head, they're going to be hustlers forever because they can't get money to finance it. Why don't we start by having a mass drive? That's why when you drive into my compound, the first thing you see is a micro insurance, Sagicor. First thing you see when you drive in. Jamaicans are independent. Let me tell you, if a Jamaican man have the means and a woman, they will buy the quality education. They will live in the neighborhood they want. Are you with me? You don't have to cradle them like they are paraplegic. There are some low-hanging fruits to bring our people into the mainstream of the economy. Has anybody take much time to study the credit union movement and the bank and the building society? Unfortunately, the banking acts of Jamaica changed by a man who was too scared, and so he killed off a whole generation of entrepreneurs in Jamaica. My wife is in heaven, so if me can't tell the truth, me don't know who can. I'm going to work for none of them, and then I'll donate nothing to my work. And so the credit union is losing its character. The building societies are losing their character. Are you following me? All competing with the commercial bank, who, if you don't have enough money that proves that you don't need the loan, they not give you the loan. They invest in making richer men richer. Men who are poor in ideas but rich in pocket. We want some banks that invest in people who are poor in pocket but rich in idea. Them kind of radical thinking we want, man. And we want some low-hanging fruits. You say all that you need in a VM. You need to have a account in a VM. And VM needs to have a pool, a social investment fund, into which it attracts remittances. You think I used to be in America and send home remittance, one of the most wasteful things. In the days when you used to keep girlfriend, you send money to Jamaica, she'll buy more bun with your money. And you don't even get it with cheese. People in America send money to build a house when they're ready to retire. They come back. Make them send 2% of it to the social investment fund, where a young person can go and get money to go to school or to invest in a business. Are you with me? I think there are some low-hanging fruits if we could engage the Christian community in conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. So, thank you, Dr. Morgan. So, two little points. One on your second point, which I think it's a good opportunity to inform our viewers about some of the work being done by many in the financial sector, because in fairness to the government, led by the BOJ, they have been pursuing a financial inclusion strategy. Right? Hold on. So the first element of it is to just ensure that it's easier to open an account with a deposit-taking institution. Because many people are being, in a sense, disenfranchised because of all the account opening requirements. So I think the Bank of Jamaica has led well on that, and it's a journey. But we're started in that regard. Institutions such as VM have done our own work. So we fully support the social entrepreneurship mission. In fact, what I would say to you, one of the proudest things we have done, we established a foundation in VM, the VM Foundation, established in 2018. And we have running now what we call a social enterprise program. And that social enterprise program is teaching youngsters 12 to 14 years of age. They're in forms 1 to 3. We are now in 10 high schools, and we're trying to digitalize the program so that we can scale it up. But the whole idea of that program is to teach our youngsters critical life skills, business skills, financial literacy, because empowerment starts with knowledge. So it doesn't make sense, I would say, boy, to convert all our people into business people without them having the required knowledge. And so that's what we're doing. We're investing, and you'll be amazed. I think you'll be pleased to see some of the work being done by these youngsters. We have an expo. We just had the expo in May or June of this year, in which these 10 schools came forward, many of them from the inner city, to just to exhibit the work that they have been doing. We have some schools in the inner city in Kingston, about 3 in St. Elizabeth, St. James, etc. So that's one thing that I think has some really good seeds of hope for the future in terms of how we can equip our youngsters. So that's called the VM Enrich, the social entrepreneurship program. But I think I wanted to challenge you a bit on the education. It is true that we pay taxes. And I would say to you, the evidence is that Jamaica, as the Jamaican government, in terms of per capita, in terms of the percentage of GDP, spends pretty much the same or even better than most of our counterparts of our size. Right? So
we spend about 22%, But what has been happening, a lot of Jamaica's budget was eaten up by debt servicing. Yeah. We have to give credit where credit is due. That is down now to almost 70%. Right. So you're absolutely right. Right? Developed countries can spend as much as 30%. Barbados spend about 28% of their budget on education. So you're right. We're up into that region.
We're there. So we're spending. So we are paying the taxes, and in fairness to governments of, different colors, they have been spending on education. The issue is whether we are receiving the outcomes, whether we are seeing the outcomes. And that's why I'm putting on the table the need for better governance and accountability to ensure that we get more value for the dollar that is being spent. And that's where I believe that not only the church, but civil society, the communities ought to get more involved there. I see, it bothers me. People block roads, demonstrate all the while for roads, I understand, for water, I understand, no, for other amenities, which I fully understand. But I've never heard a committee in uproar about the outcomes of a school that serves the community, as if it doesn't matter. Are the parents paying attention to the outcomes, whether it is PEP or CXC, that a school board and the school administration is delivering? Those are things for a committee to be just as passionate about. And that's what I'm saying. I'm challenging all of us to demonstrate greater ownership for the future of our children. Because it's not only it's about the children, but it's also about the overall welfare of the nation. Because we're slipping. We're further behind the developed world than we were in 1960, is my point.
Let me add something on education, because I am an educator. And I'll tell you, opening up a lot of trade schools. I was down in the country 2 days ago, way up in the hill, where they're building this church, and the pastor was boasting that on top we're going to have a skills trading center. Good. Too late. Too late. Don Robotham wrote an article recently that one of the reasons why Jamaica's productivity is comparatively low is that we do not have what is called complexity in our goods and services. We don't have complexity. We don't have enough individuals who can self-learn. So for instance, I have 120 employees. Right now I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about shift change in Lasco warehouse. And they have one new manager who come from foreign. And he come and he has these things that we are going to change everything to metrics. We are putting in a multi-million US dollar inventory management system. It's all going to be metrics. The next weekend, I had workers, and they volunteered to come to Trenchtown in the border, and I was teaching them warehouse metrics. Till now, the companies have pressure because their management don't know it. So it's a kind of a higher level. A lot of things are becoming digitalized, machine, so you're moving away from labor, that kind of stuff. But we have a lot of work to do, because there was one MP who ran on trying to make education. He think he was running to be elected. Them run him away. People say, you can't send picnic or school for a hungry belly. A saltfish will a month. We have a lot of work to do, and the mass of the people are in our pews.
Gentlemen, thank you. This is interesting. Henley, I hope you realize that because Courtney is from the United Church, and he is actually in a United Church location, he could not respond to the issue of the bun and the cheese. I just thought I would let you know that. He wasn't ignoring you. You got it, okay. I want to ask each of you before we move on to the next aspect of the thesis statement, ahead of the questions from the audience, you know, what is your one suggestion to a denomination that's listening today? So we want to release the Henley Morgans from the you know, from the churches. You know, we want to release we want to release Henley, you know, the Kengeles and the work you all did, you know, with the studio in Trenchtown, and so we want to release people from the congregations that are locked up with this huge store of human capital that's locked up in our congregations, that, you know, by the grace that's upon them, can do some of these things. So you have done a tremendous job in showing Jamaica that a human resource management consultancy can be located in Trenchtown and can equip and release creative potential, yes, and facility to support recruitment needs in corporate Jamaica. You shocked everybody, and the shock remains. So we want to see more of that. But what is your one recommendation? I want to ask each of you to do this for a denomination on how we must respond to this deficit. Yes, this deficit that relates to organization and equipping, that we are suggesting in the thesis statement the church has retreated from in terms of the outcome of the church's retreat from part of its core mandate. So Courtney, one suggestion for denomination, and Henley another.
Thank you, Michael. So my one suggestion, one word: collaboration. I mean, just collaborate across denominational boundaries. The building societies, great example of that. My own VM was started by a Reverend G.W. Donner. He was rector of the Kingston Parish Church. The founding fathers of VM were from different denominations. In fact, the very first building society, Kingston Benefit, was established in 1864 by Reverend Gardner, who was at the then North Street Congregational Church. And he got together with some friends. Now here's the beauty about the VM story, 1878. Several denominations involved. In fact, the secretary was a Jewish rabbi. Reverend Dick has it in his book, right? It is the beauty of when we come together under Jesus, under that particular mandate, forgetting our individual, you know, barriers, right, silos, and kind of understand our bigger mission. In Jamaica needs that unity right now. You might not get the opportunity to work with 5 different churches in your particular community, but link up with the one that kind of shares your vision right away. Get going, others will join. That's what I would want to share, collaboration.
You know, being an ardent past student, I have had to allow people who go to schools that have KC as the initial to steal from me. So he gave the answer I was going to give. By the way, if you want a reformer to model your life off, choose John Knox. Whatever the Queen, whatever said, I fear John Knox and his praying more than I fear the army. Oh my God. Wonderful. And it's one of the last comments I'm going to make because I have to leave. I think one of the things that shaped me is that I was born into a church family. My father was the Reverend Dr. Cyril Arthur Morgan. When I came along, they were living in St. James with my mother, who we married in Panama. God bless them. And he was at the manse in Malden. And to get to our manse, we would have to drive by Kensington. You have Kensington, Point, Maroontown, Malden. And Kensington is where the fire was set, the great Christmas fire. That that make the English people say, we're going to give them emancipation now. Right? When they set the trash house on fire in Kensington, it could be seen in 3 parishes. Which is a whole heap of price we pay. And they came and grabbed Sam Sharp. And Sam Sharp, who had instigated it, said, I would rather die on them there gathered than spend one more day in slavery. That's a church. So I used to pass there almost every time we go to Montego Bay. And my father, who was an intellectual, would never miss just educated. So I have the heart of a revolutionary beating in my chest. Are you with me? It has to come from somewhere. You can't get it. When you end up in a trench zone for no man's land, you know, and people know your father and question, you know, it has to come from somewhere. Now, let me tell you this. There is a thing in mathematics. Allow me. There's a thing in mathematics called the 80-20 rule. It's called Pareto principle. Are you with me? When you do an analysis, you will find that 80% of the problem is caused by 20% of the root cause. Jamaica is at such a state now that it's like a cat chasing his whole tail and the tail in his mouth. So you don't know whether you must chop off the head or chop off the tail. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. The average homicide, intentional homicide rate for the world is 7.6. In Jamaica, we were at the top. In 2015, when I went to Trenchtown, it was 65 per 100,000. Civil war is 40. Wake up, church. This year, it's going to be about 43. At least nobody universally anymore making a point that Jamaica is number 1, number 2, number 3. They just say Jamaica is in the top 10. It's actually a better rating because it's coming down. I think murder by itself is the major root cause of everything. You cannot build and sustain. Try to what me do in Trenchtown now. We're investing 20, 30 million in the studio right now. You go try do it. Don't take it over in 1 week. You think any company go invest in them community and damage their brand? How are you going to deal with murder that saps Jamaica of 4.5% of GDP? That means if we had the murder rate of, God forbid, Trinidad, our growth of GDP would be about 8-9%. Jamaica's GDP is about 17 billion US per year. There are Jamaicans who are richer than the country. I believe you have to attack the problem at the root. And believe it or not, although the solutions might be economic, the root causes are not mainly economic, they are moral and spiritual. Are you talking to me, church people? Are you hearing what I'm saying? They are moral and spiritual. Now, I don't mean we have to, preach more. Are you with me? But we have to go forward. Our people are so damaged that there is no trust. Less than 20% of Jamaicans say they trust government or police. 25% say they don't trust business. 28% journalists. Do you know that church ranked the highest among with schools and universities? But I got to tell you that it's just 52%. But we can do a lot with that. You have to go through with a value-based outreach and engagement. But what happened? Most churches now don't even open at night because of gunmen. I can't even tell the last time outside of our group that I see church holding a street side meeting in Trenchard. I can't even tell. They even lock down church based on curfew. We have to get radical in doing what the church is mandated to do. But I think that, to me, that is we track the murder statistics. And one thing I know now, and I'll end with this. You see, like me sitting here, me know couple hundred men who now fire gun. You know why? Them they found my job, and if them not go, them have to answer to me. Although it's transactional, give me the gun in your hand, I give you knowledge in your head and money in your pocket. And make you to be able to sleep with both eyes shut. There's a language, there's a way you can appeal to Jamaica. Every Jamaican is an entrepreneur and want more. That is what my recommendation would be. Thank you, Brother McIntyre.
Thank you, Henley. You've said some things which are going to detain you for a little time, because we want to take some questions. Justice Batts has a question before you run away.
Be kind.
All right, good evening, everybody, and well, congratulations and excellent presentation. I want to make a statement, and then a short statement, and then I'll ask you to comment on whether you think what I have to say is the third leg of the stool, Mr. Chairman. Because we have heard about the social outreach and church, I've heard about education. I am a bit of a skeptic, because when you talk about church, when you look at history, it has represented a lot of division. In fact, at the time of emancipation, yes, the church precipitated the revolution that led to emancipation. But at the same time, you had a church union that were burning down churches, Methodist and Baptist, and running them to protect slavery. So the church has always had this dichotomy throughout history, and division and separation, and you know, one may have to one day examine the extent to which, when we use the word church, religion, has been a contributing factor to where we are. But the fourth leg, the third leg of this stool, I want to suggest, is political action. Professor Patterson's book, excellent read. I would commend it to anybody who has read it. And one of the points he makes is the one you just made, Professor Dr. Morgan, is he identifies, I'm going to put it this way, lack of trust, and he traces that lack of trust to the level of corruption. I want to suggest it's not murder is the problem. It's the corruption in society that leads to murder, to violence, to crime. It's the difference between those who have a lot and those who have nothing, the perception based on reality, that those who have been maintained by unlawful means. And if them can do it, why not? I want my justice. I want to suggest that one of the reasons for this corruption is that right-minded people have shied away from the political process. There may be good reasons why they have. But I want to suggest that the political parties, the political segment of society, are not attracting or keeping persons with the right value system. And that those are the right value system. I think a preponderance of them should be found in the church. But a lot of church people I know say they leave it up to God. A lot of them, they get into the church, it means they get out of participation in society. They may do the social work, they may do education, but some don't even want to vote. In fact, we know that the voting rate, if you count it as the percentage of those persons with the age to vote, not those who have registered and don't vote, the person with the age to vote. I mean, it's almost 80% of Jamaicans who don't want to participate, those who have the age. Right? Those who register, I think the percentage is more like 70%. So the question is, do you agree that it would be a good thing if the church, as part of its ministry, encourage its leaders and its members? Why can't a minister of religion be a candidate for member of parliament? Is that against religion? Is that against the law? But how many ministers of religion we see as candidates to represent constituency? I'd love your comment on that.
I've been going first all evening. Well, actually, David, I really do like your third leg. I'd in fact planned to respond to the suggestion about the third leg by suggesting something slightly different. I was going to call that governance reform, right? But that's okay. I would want to link it with the political involvement, because allow me to back up a bit. One of the most influential books I've read recently is Why Nations Fail. I encourage us to look it up, buy it on Amazon, Why Nations Fail. Some economists did the work. They looked at countries across eras, across cultures, across geographies. Something that has been consistent. The countries that do well have certain things in common in terms of how their economy and their politics are structured. And those that have consistently failed have the same things in common. Anytime power is concentrated, and political power and economic power are concentrated, whether you call it capitalist or communist, you're doomed to fail in the long run. And so that is what here has compromised the trust. That the power is so concentrated, and both the political power and the economic power. So probably that's why I was suggesting that we should get more involved in the constitutional reform, for example. Because the two-party system that we have here with Westminster, probably that ought not to work for us. Probably we need a proportional representation that I think was proposed some years ago by the NDM. I think NDM proposed that. And the proportional representation would then possibly allow a church group, or people like-minded, let's say, to get together and really put a platform that probably people would find attractive, and you'd be able to get into Parliament in the same way now that some other countries are forcing their voices to the table. So it's something that I would want to support, but I really feel that it has to be buttressed by the constitutional reform, because we have really deeply embedded in Jamaica this two-party thing that, you know, with the power so concentrated, it's very difficult for people to break down.
I want to thank you for taking me to something which I struggle to avoid. And it's politics. For all my years, and I mark everything, I wanted to be like my dad. So when I go back to Jamaica, I'm going to get into politics. And I'm going to, you know, now that I'm there, I say, thank God for making me, putting me on with it. I know I'll never be a politician again. But you can't avoid politics. But I'm glad at least you didn't say the church should set up a political party. And I just want to endorse that answer, the concentration of power. Now, I personally believe in an executive president, I believe it adds, God forbid we end up with the American, we know all the problems America has, but I think we have to have clear separation between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And I think the head of the executive, who is the president, should be elected by the people. Jamaican politicians will never accept that unless pressured by the largest membership group in Jamaica. And I just want you all to just think about it, right, of how that allows that person to represent all the people and not just those in a party. I really think it's in the reform agenda that we should attack that problem.
Even before we get involved in directly in the politics, there are some things that the church, by virtue of its power, ought to take a position on. What is the position of, do you know what the position of the church, or in the church group, is on whether we should continue to use the Privy Council as the final court of appeal? Who can tell me? Right, so we have a few people who have made that decision that we ought to continue, that this first constitutional reform process ought not to include that. And I don't know if the church has a view about it. And if we have a view about it, shouldn't that be made known? Shouldn't we be lobbying for that? If we are the people of justice, shouldn't we be thinking about how justice can be more accessible for the people of Jamaica? Right? I think that's something for the church to be very involved in, and I really haven't heard that being discussed. I want to put it on the table.
Thank you, Courtney. Thanks, David, for that important question. We still have more to answer on it, but Kengele is going to jump in now.
No, I'm representing the online audience, and we're part of the big thing is just developing relationships. And this has been 5 years of developing relationships. So, Faye, it's Faye Ellington is online with us, and she has for the longest time apparently been directing the conversation by some mental process based upon the flow of conversation. But she was asking yourself, Henley, some time ago, and again, it seems that, I don't know that the camera was panning to the audience, but she did mention your name, David. She asked whether, Henley, you would think that it would be a good thing that for some Sundays, pastors just set aside sermons for 1 or 2 Sundays to discuss the Constitution, and maybe book somebody like a David Batts, who is here. So she's asking what you think about that idea, so I'm throwing it out.
I have to be careful. In the establishment of the first deacon board, we know it was Brother Peter, or whoever it is, that got up and said, you know, yeah, we recognize there are these social problems, but if we ever get mixed up in it, then we would ignore certain other things, huh? And so the first deacon board came about. I have to be careful about what else I add to the job descriptions of pastors. You know? I just have to be careful that I don't try to put forward a proposal that never will be accepted. Because then that becomes the battle and not the objective you're trying to achieve. Are you with me? So, although it's a good idea on the face of it, and we can see the results it might have, I would need to think about that a little bit more.
So, Kegele, maybe I could just jump in on this one. something that certainly in my environment we have done, which is we close service and we try to finish early, and we have a forum focused on things like those for another hour and a half or so after service. And we have a lot of activists in our church, as Leighton knows very well, and it has worked very well having these and we have presentations from people within the church and from outside of the church. Professor Patrick Brand, for example, has made. So I think that perhaps that's the way to go: early closing, and then a forum for outsiders to come in and be a part of the conversation. Are there any more questions from the audience online or in the room? So we're going to be closing at 6:30, which is not too long from now, so we're going to make them very brief.
Well, while Joe is looking up the question for the audience, I would just like to make a comment. I'm not sure it's a question. Agreeing with you, Courtney, about the issue of collaboration of churches. In fact, the particular thing that I've been trying to emphasize for some years now, since we had the first conversation on Christians and government, is the notion that it is in fact a culture of collaboration that somehow we need to be creative enough to think what will encourage that. And if I were to put it in a question format, because there are things that I don't know. Henley, I know that you were one of the instigators in the initiating of the JUGC. Well, for this book, volume 2 of the book, Jamaica, Governance and Elections, Jamaica on the Global Frontier. And this is a detailed blow-by-blow commentary on electoral practices and governance practices in Jamaica from 1663 to the present. It's an unparalleled work. And because I helped in the editing of it, I was kind of privy to what for me was a mind-blowing thing. That after this deep look at government, my father, who is the author, decided to spend the ultimate chapter talking to the JUGC directly. And I asked him, are you crazy? I know that some people wear their Christianity on their sleeves, but I thought that for an academic with a reputation as he should be a little bit more prudent. So, but he was convinced academically that government is not equipped to handle certain long-term developmental mandates by just the creature that it is. And that historically, that's one of the reasons why, when it came to critical junctures of social evolution in the Jamaican experiment, it is the church that stepped in, did a thing, and then stepped out when things were kind of normalized. And the big arena now is what we're talking about: crime and violence and social inequity in the inner cities. And so his challenge, I thought it was quite detailed. It represented a lot of thought. How the Jamaica Umbrella Group of Churches for the next 50 years could organize itself for a transgenerational focus that owned that problem from the church's perspective. And it represented, certainly for me, thought that I still would love to hear a response a formal response, perhaps even from the Jamaican Bello group of churches, and I've been trying to kind of instigate. That's one thing. But Henley, in terms of my question to you, because everybody was impressed when the JUGC appeared on the scene. My father calls it, what does he call it? He doesn't call it a social blasphemy. There's a word that he uses. He thinks of the JUGC as having enormous social potential. But for everybody who knows the inner workings of the JUGC, I remember just some time ago listening to a program on one of the networks, the Christian networks, and they were demanding that the JUGC get active. So there's a culture in terms of relationships and how we do church that usually doesn't allow for close collaboration long term. And if by way of comparison, for example, Courtney, you were talking about the schools, and for some time now, for example, I have been aware of and been in relationship with members who are on the board, all of the church-owned schools, and they have been having very excellent plans. And you know what I mean, in forums like this, it's wonderful to get up and talk about it. But in terms of my personal experience, which is very limited, but it is all that I have, it seemed to me that in terms of getting things going, getting people across the spectrum to collaborate, we seem to have a problem with that. We seem to have a problem, in other words, with meaningful, and I don't know if the word is sensitive. I want to, excuse me if I'm a little long in trying to develop my concept, but it's because I'm really looking for an answer. There's something that Ainsley Henrique said to me once, which made an impression. When Ainsley came as a young student, and I don't even think he got his degree he found that there were people here, P.J. Patterson was one of them, who looked on him and, I mean, looking past things like SACC and what have you, just recognized the potential. And made way for him. Said, listen, you look like you can do, and put him in place to do something. In other words, making room, making space. Do we make space for innovation? Do we spot and mentor? Or do we really have a problem recognizing strengths, weaknesses? Do we have a problem, in other words, in recognizing how to move? So that's my question. Your experience with even initiating and that enormous first victory with the Dudos confrontation certainly showed us the possibility of clout. But what was your experience with getting the church organized to the point of making that first public statement? And do you find any resonance in what I'm saying about there being a difficulty in getting church people to collaborate across denominations? And if that's what you think is the answer to that, or how can we develop a culture of relationship that allows for meaningful collaboration?
Remember that at a particular point of my sharing, I did make the point that the hardest aspects of the job are already done. We have leaders in the right places who are sensitized to what the issues are, and even by virtue of the positions they now hold, they can almost be totally self-serving to their company's interests. Because you have board, you know, it's a reporter. So you can't just take up $1 billion and put in a helicopter and drop in a, right? But they are properly sensitized. We have the masses, and nobody really knows why Jamaicans are so good at running, why they are a powerful name in the Olympics. Nobody has figured it out, right? Nobody knows why Trenchtown, there's no other community like that in the world of its size. which gave birth to a genre of music which in less than a generation became mainstream. You ever think about them then? We don't know. Well, Jamaica has the men and the women, both males and females, because of that we think the men are right off, in terms of nascent entrepreneurs, are where they are. But my God, man, if you have men like that on a corner and there's no access, then when they get up off the corner, they're going to go block a shop or stick you down at the ATM. Now, one of the things we have not learned from slavery and the overcoming of slavery, and we have not institutionalized it, is how to go from an idea to a coalition to a movement. Yeah, we have you think all of this just started with burning down the plantation at Kensington? It started even by the slaves learning how to code their language. And the pastors coming on, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. And the white man glad for him to go preach to the people about milk and honey. But when he reached, he preached about the land of milk and honey too. But he educated them. We don't know how to do that. I remember distinctly the birth of the Jamaica Umbrella group of churches. Right? And I definitely remember what were some of the driving factors. Remember, the Jamaica Umbrella group of churches is an umbrella of umbrellas. And for a period, initially, it caught fire. As a matter of fact, one time we could say we represent 94% of the mainstream church membership. You know, when evangelicals say mainstream, what we mean? It is. And I remember there were two statutes, two objectives. One of them is to give a common voice to the church on national issues. Because we knew what it was like to be invited to meet with P.J. Patterson. And I would tell them the story. I met with P.J. and he said, Dr. Morgan, thank you for coming to see me with this group. But you know, the next meeting was just a group like you from the church. So you know you're not getting no buying. Because on whose behalf do you speak? Right? So the need for collaboration, common voice, not abrogating the right of individual and the local. You know, I believe very much in the local church. Right? I don't believe in giving them their agenda. But there are some national issues. Right? The other one was whether we could generate resources but become the wholesaler of those resources to the umbrellas, which would be the retailer, to support their prospect. So at least they would buy in. And the third one was to acknowledge, as you rightly said in your thesis, that there's a lot of good work being done by different churches. How could we bring that to the mainstream knowledge so that it could be benchmarked? Wouldn't that be wonderful? But I don't know why it never... I don't know. I don't know if it's in the organization. I think it's almost something like in the diaspora, where the thing gets big and influential enough, and so people start politicizing it. When I say politics, I don't mean GLP, PNP, but the position of head look good on your resume. And you decide who's going to go, you know, pass it around, there is some of that in turn, and then it starts to become exclusionary, like exclude certain people. Yeah, that divisiveness, that's just a part of our culture now. Why we can't live our motto out of many one. You know? So, rather than start a new effort though, I think we should engage with that group because of the promise that's there. I really believe so. By the way, just in your presentation, you mentioned some things that I wonder if the church, he mentioned the inclusiveness policy, the inclusion. There's a policy without effort. How many of you know, for instance, that right now it's being drafted a social enterprise legislation? That Jamaica is moving toward being one of the first countries to have 4 sectors of the economy. Come on, teacher. What are they? 1, public sector. 2, government sector. 3, non-profit sector. What's the 4th? Because you know, me can't be non-profit sector, you know, I don't have used the word except like now. Because non-profit is a hermaphrodite that have both sexual organs but can't impregnate itself. So I'm not going to be a non-profit. Right? The social enterprise sector, the legislation is being drafted. Smart businesses are coalescing because you need to build out an ecosystem for the banking, for the education, a certain kind of education. You need to build out, but it's actually happening. But it's happening, it seems, out of the know of the church. We're not in the room, we're not influencing, we're not pushing some of the things that are. So for instance, in the time of slavery, when they came out, government finally do something and come out with the sugar, whatever. The churchmen just got behind it and push it. Because they know that government grant and subsidy coming to the small agricultural, you know, and the free villages. But if we don't know what's happening on the macro level, and if we can't speak in the language of private sector and the government, we have a problem.
Thank you, Henley. Colleagues, I think our time has been well spent, but it is far spent. I want to suggest that we ought to leave here with a consensus that we are kind of moving beyond the idea of a stool, maybe to a chair, but let's say that the stool has 4 legs. Can we work with a 4-legged stool? Let me attempt to suggest what those 4 legs might be. And I want to suggest that the 4 legs, leg number 1 is a new deal for education, and a new deal in education and human capital development. Number 2 is an emphasis on social entrepreneurship as a kind of a new holy grail for us to begin to pursue as church. Christians, as church, yes. Yes. Right, and I want to be clear that I didn't say socialist entrepreneurship. I said social entrepreneurship. The 3rd leg of the 4-legged stool, I would suggest, is a commitment to promoting political involvement of the Christian community. We're being very clear that we're not promoting partisanship, especially negative partisanship. The 4th leg of the stool I'm suggesting is an emphasis on building a commitment to best-in-class governance in our nation at all levels. And the church is included in that. And I want to suggest that the seat of the 4-legged stool is collaboration. And that collaboration has to start and be exemplified by the church, and the Jamaica Umbrella Groups of churches has been targeted in the conversation to begin to represent that kind of let's call it a new deal in collaboration, Courtney, as we move forward. I'm going to ensure that the conversation is shared with the umbrella groups, leadership, because I am connected to that group. I'm not part of the leadership. But I think the new chairman, who is Reverend Courtney Gordon from the Church of God, is deeply interested in shifting the MO of the JUGC, and he's looking for opportunities to broaden the input, of many people in the Christian community, to move the organizational and operating ethos of the JUGC to a different place. So I'm going to commit to the organizers to support that. Colleagues, this has been an interesting conversation. We didn't get a chance to talk about the need for the church to be delivered from its disconnection to the struggle of the Jamaican people for social justice and economic equity and welfare. I'm going to talk to some of my pastoral colleagues who may be watching. This idea that because the woke people are using the term social justice means that we must regard it as anathema is nonsense. And I want to just challenge all of you guys that are out there who have adopted this evangelical right religious persuasion around the idea that social justice is something we must run away from. When bad people begin to use good words, we're going to run away from all the good words? No. So the theme is very targeted. I think it invites us to recognize that the issue of social justice it is firmly set within the context of the scriptures. And if we're going to be faithful to our mandate as a church, we cannot ignore a need to confront social justice issues in our country. Reverend John Clark borrowed £400 from Dr. Sturridge and established a scheme which was led by himself, Reverend Philippa from St. Catherine, Reverend Burchell from Montego Bay, from St. James, yes, and there was somebody else who escapes my mind today, Reverend from Trelawney, Nib. Same scheme managed by these four guys. £400 borrowed by John Clark from Mr. Sturridge. And he built churches and free villages. Sturgetown, Wilberforce, Buxton, where my grandfather established a church 70 years ago, and it is still there. We must return to a place of intellectual leadership on the matters that call for strategic action of the church around reclaiming the heritage that we are very clear on. We are what we are today as a nation because of church activism, because of an embrace of the need to confront social deficits in our country, because of the need for us to confront economic injustice in our nation. This conversation is just a start. I want to encourage the Caribbean Christian Leadership Network to continue the conversation. You're doing a great job in stirring conversations, Kengele and Leighton and Joan and the rest of the team and George. I want to encourage the conversation to continue. The church has to play a role in defining what good leadership looks like. And there is a dearth of inspirational leadership. And my ongoing thesis is that results are driven by discretionary effort. And discretionary effort is driven by inspirational leadership. There is no expectation that we can have of the kind of results we're looking for unless we're prepared to find a way to store a new deal in emotional commitment amongst our people. The church is in the right place to do that. And the Caribbean Christian Leadership Network is in a good place to provide leadership around an ongoing set of conversations about how leadership must look like if it is going to be successful in the Caribbean and in Jamaica, and what leadership must produce if it is to command respect. Thank you all very much for coming. This has been a great evening. Thanks to the panelists for the quality of their presentations and for the the intensity of the conversations. I think we leave here much better for having been here this evening. Lord bless you all. Amen.
Now, thanks. I understand the meeting is closed, but there are certain things when the Holy Spirit get on me, I said, I don't mind speaking to the benches. So please, don't tarry if you have to leave. But when I attended Arden High School, and people still don't understand that the record books will show that I probably had the most repeats between Forms 2 and 5. They ignore it out of respect now, since I'm the founder of the Arden Alumni Association. And one of the habits I had as a young guy, struggling with the rigors of school, was to sit beside in tests, sit beside a boy or a girl.